When a subway station clerk found a little girl crying and huddled in the bathroom, he froze in shock, realizing she was clutching a newborn baby in her arms. At first, he thought she must have run away from the hospital, which was only one train station away, but her young age, the hospital gown, and the baby still didn't add up. It was only when he called the police and a man who claimed to be the girl's father arrived that he realized the true horror of the situation. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Malcolm Gaines stepped into Crest Hill subway station for his night shift, the cold fluorescent lights spilling across the tiled floor, casting long, sterile shadows. The clock above the ticket booth blinked 10 p.m., signaling the start of another long night. At 45, he had spent years working as a clerk here, yet the night shift never sat right with him. The silence between passing trains was something he could never quite get used to. At times dense and suffocating, at others fragile, stretched thin over the possibility of danger lurking just out of sight. His manager had informed him earlier that there would be a significant influx of passengers around 10:15 p.m. due to a music concert ending at Crest Hill Stadium nearby. The station had prepared for this by stationing more subway personnel on the platform and around the station. Malcolm straightened his orange vest and ensuring his name tag was clearly visible as he exited the staff room after punching in. Tonight, instead of his usual post behind the ticket and information booth, he was assigned to safety control work. His job was to ensure the safety and well-being of the incoming rush of passengers at the assigned platform. He took his position on the platform, one behind the yellow line, watching as the digital display indicated the 10:15 p.m. train would arrive in 5 minutes. The atmosphere was already changing as concert-goers began to flood the platform. Their excited chatter and energetic demeanor contrasted sharply with the usual quiet of Malcolm's night shifts. As more people arrived, the volume on the platform steadily increased. Malcolm found himself constantly reminding passengers to stay behind the yellow line, his voice growing hoarse as he competed with the noise. He answered a barrage of questions about train schedules and routes, all while keeping a watchful eye on the ever-growing crowd. As every seconds ticked by, he noticed the platform became increasingly packed, bodies pressed close together in anticipation of the arriving train. Then the station's speakers crackled to life, announcing the incoming train. Malcolm raised his voice, shouting for everyone to stand back and make way for exiting passengers. He could feel the vibration of the approaching train through the soles of his shoes. As the train pulled into the station with a screech of metal on metal, Malcolm noticed with relief that most of the cabins were relatively empty. This would make the boarding process smoother and reduce the risk of accidents. Once again, he called out for everyone to stand back and allow exiting passengers to disembark first. Malcolm took his place by one of the middle cabin doors just as they slid open with a hiss. Only a few passengers stepped out, their expressions flickering between surprise and mild irritation at the waiting throng pressing forward. He barely registered them as he crouched to assist an elderly woman in a wheelchair, steadying her as she maneuvered over. That's when he saw her. A young girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, in a pale blue hospital gown, carrying something in her arms. She ran out of one of the train cabins, her bare feet slapping against the cold platform floor. Malcolm blinked, sure he must be mistaken. But no, there she was, quickly disappearing into the sea of people still flooding the platform. Malcolm processed what he had just witnessed. The girl had been alone. No adult had exited the cabin with her. His heart rate quickened, instinct telling him that something was very wrong. Malcolm's first impulse was to chase after her, but the pressing crowd around him made that impossible. He had a job to do, and he couldn't abandon his post. The safety of the hundreds of passengers around him had to come first. With one hand still directing the flow of people, Malcolm reached for his radio intercom with the other. The plastic was slick with sweat as he brought it to his mouth. "Security!" he called out, his voice taut with urgency. "Did you spot a young girl in a hospital gown running across platform 1? She appeared to be carrying a white blanket, possibly wrapped around a baby." There was a moment of static before the security's voice crackled through the speaker. "Negative, Malcolm. Haven't seen anyone matching that description." What's your location? Malcolm quickly explained his position and that he couldn't leave his post with so many people around. He asked security to help search for the girl, emphasizing the unusual nature of the situation. Copy that, the security responded. We'll keep an eye out and let you know if we spot her. As the train doors beeped their warning and began to close, leaving a still substantial crowd waiting for the next train, Malcolm's mind raced. Where had the girl come from? Where was she going? And most importantly, what was she carrying? The platform remained a hive of activity as Malcolm tried to make sense of what he had just witnessed. The rhythmic rumble of the departing train faded into the distance, replaced by the persistent hum of conversation from the remaining passengers. Malcolm's eyes continuously scanned the crowd, hoping for another glimpse of the girl in the hospital gown, but she had vanished as quickly as she had appeared. As he directed passengers and answered queries, Malcolm's mind worked overtime. He recalled that this train had originated from the direction of Crest Hill General Hospital Station, just one stop before Crest Hill Station. It was only a few minutes away by rail, which would explain the girl's attire. She must be a patient who had run away. But what was she carrying? The digital display above the platform caught Malcolm's eye. The next train wasn't due for another 20 minutes. He made a split-second decision. He needed to search the platform to make sure the girl wasn't still here, lost and potentially in danger. "Excuse me, pardon me," Malcolm muttered as he made his way through the crowd. The press of bodies was claustrophobic, the air thick with the mingled scents of perfume, sweat and excitement. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for any sign of the young girl. But there was no flash of pale blue hospital gown, no glimpse of a small figure clutching a white bundle. The worry in Malcolm's gut grew stronger with each passing moment. He was considering calling 911 or Crest Hill Hospital when a figure caught his attention. A woman, her clothes worn and dirty, was weaving unsteadily through the crowd. The sharp smell of alcohol clung to her like a cloud, causing nearby passengers to wrinkle their noses and step away. Despite her inebriated state, the woman's eyes were sharp as they locked onto Malcolm. She raised a trembling hand, pointing beyond the stairs that led to the upper level of the station. "You should check the girl's bathroom upstairs," she slurred, swaying slightly on her feet. Malcolm hesitated, his training warring with his instincts. "Ma'am, I can't just enter the women's restroom, but I can inform the female staff if something needs to be checked or cleaned up." The woman's bloodshot eyes narrowed, a spark of lucidity cutting through the alcoholic haze. "There's a young girl on the ground in there," she insisted, her voice low and urgent. Malcolm's heart skipped a beat. Could it be the girl he saw earlier? "What does she look like?" he pressed. "Is she wearing a hospital gown? Which restroom upstairs?" But the moment of clarity had passed. The woman just shrugged, her gaze already wandering. "Do your job and check for yourself," she mumbled, before stumbling away, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as she had appeared. Malcolm stood frozen for a moment, torn between his duty to remain on the platform and the urgent need to investigate. The memory of the girl's frightened face flashed through his mind, making his decision for him. With a last glance at the platform to ensure no immediate crisis was unfolding, Malcolm set off towards the upper level of the subway station. He took the stairs two at a time, his breath coming in short gasps as he pushed against the stream of people heading down to the platform. "Sorry, excuse me, coming through," he muttered, ignoring the annoyed looks and muttered complaints as he made his way upstairs. When he reached the upper level, he paused, orienting himself. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, making the familiar space seem suddenly alien. There were 2 restrooms on this floor, each near different exits. The constant flow of people entering and exiting the station created a chaotic dance of movement and noise. Malcolm headed for the closest restroom first, near the entrance where a steady stream of people was still arriving from the concert. Without thinking, driven by urgency and concern, he pushed open the door to the women's restroom. The reaction was immediate and hostile. A chorus of angry shouts and shocked gasps filled the small space. A long queue of women glared at him, their expressions a mix of outrage and disbelief. "Hey, what are you doing here, pervert?" one woman yelled, her face flushed with anger. Flustered and embarrassed, Malcolm quickly backed out of the restroom, stammering apologies. "I'm so sorry. There's been a misunderstanding. I'm looking for a lost child. I'm with subway security," he explained hastily, showing his badge. The women's expressions softened slightly at the mention of a lost child, but they still watched him warily as he closed the door. Malcolm berated himself for his carelessness. In his haste, he had violated protocol and potentially compromised his position. But the thought of the girl, alone and possibly in danger, spurred him on. He hurried to the other side of the station, where the second restroom was located near the other exit. This area was quieter, with fewer people around. The sounds of the busy station seemed muffled here, creating an almost eerie atmosphere. Learning from his previous mistake, Malcolm knocked on the restroom door and called out before slowly pushing it open. "Hello? Is anyone in here? This is subway security. I'm looking for a lost child." At first, the restroom appeared empty, the row of stalls silent and still. But then he heard it. Soft, muffled sobs coming from the sink area. Malcolm's heart began to race as he stepped inside, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. There on the counter lay a crumpled white blanket, stained with a spreading patch of yellow, unmistakably the baby's urine. The sour scent lingered in the air, sharp and raw. But it was the scene beneath the sink that made Malcolm's breath catch. Curled up in the tight space, clutching a newborn to her chest, was a young girl in a hospital gown. Her frail frame trembled, her knuckles white against the fabric as she held the tiny bundle close. Wide, terrified eyes locked onto his, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. For a moment, the world beyond that cramped, dimly lit space faded, time itself suspended between them. Malcolm froze, shocked by the scene before him. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, following protocol and dialing 911 before approaching the girl. As he waited for the dispatcher to answer, he couldn't help but wonder. What series of events had led this young girl and infant to this moment? And what would happen next? As the dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, Malcolm took a deep breath. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the turmoil of emotions swirling within Malcolm. "This is Malcolm Gaines, subway clerk at Crest Hill Station," he said, his voice low and urgent to avoid startling the girl. "I found a young girl in a hospital gown with a newborn baby in the women's restroom near the east exit toward River Street. I suspect she's from Crest Hill General Hospital. I saw her get off the train that comes from that direction. We need immediate assistance." As Malcolm relayed the details to the dispatcher, his eyes never left the huddled figure beneath the sink. The girl stared back at him, her body tense, ready to bolt at any moment. The newborn in her arms shifted slightly, the damp fabric of an overflowing diaper pressing against her thin hospital gown. But aside from that small movement, the baby remained mercifully silent, nestled against the girl's chest. The dispatcher assured Malcolm they were sending units and would contact the hospital. As he ended the call, Malcolm reached for his radio, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid frightening the girl further. "Security, this is Malcolm," he spoke into the device, keeping his voice steady. "I found the girl in the upstairs women's restroom near the east exit, requesting immediate assistance and the manager's presence as per protocol." With the authorities alerted, Malcolm turned his full attention to the frightened child before him. He approached slowly, his hands held out in a non-threatening gesture. "It's okay," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "I'm here to help. The police are on their way. They will be here soon. Can you tell me your name?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She clutched the baby closer to her chest, as if afraid Malcolm might try to take it away. After a moment's hesitation, she whispered, Lena Brooks." "That's a beautiful name, Lena," Malcolm said, offering a gentle smile. "How old are you?" 9, she replied, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of the busy station. Malcolm's heart sank. He had heard of rare cases where girls as young as 8 had started their periods, but the thought of a child this young having a baby was almost too much to bear. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate situation. "Where did you get the baby from, Lena?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral and non-judgmental. Instead of answering, Lena only clutched the infant tighter to her chest. "I don't have milk for her," she said, her voice breaking, "and she's wet." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication and unspoken fears. Malcolm felt a lump rise in his throat. He glanced at the white blanket on the sink counter, observing that there was no blood on it, only the urine stain. At least the baby appeared to be safe. Beneath the blanket he noticed a piece of paper. He saw that it was a birth record. With deliberate, careful movements, Malcolm reached for it. The paper was slightly damp from the sink, but still legible. Malcolm's eyes scanned the document quickly. The baby's name was listed as Monica Brooks, along with details of her weight, height, and time of birth. He folded the paper gently and tucked it into his vest pocket for safekeeping, intending to give it to the police when they arrived. He was about to ask Lena more questions when the restroom door swung open with a creak. Margaret Steele, his manager, entered, her face a mask of shock as she took in the scene. Behind her were 2 police officers and a man Malcolm didn't recognize. The atmosphere in the small restroom immediately changed. Lena flinched at the sight of the man, shrinking further back against the wall. Malcolm noticed her reaction, and a feeling of unease settled in his stomach. One of the officers stepped forward, his badge glinting under the harsh lights. "I'm Officer Johnson, and this is my partner, Officer Chen," he said, gesturing to the woman beside him. Then he indicated the man who had entered with them. "This is Martin Brooks. He claims to be the girl's father." Martin Brooks looked relieved, as his eyes fell on Lena, but there was something in his expression that made Malcolm uneasy. A flicker of something, anger, fear, passed across his face before being replaced by concern. "Oh, thank God," Martin exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion as he stepped forward, reaching for Lena and the baby. "What were you thinking, sweetheart? Running off like that? You had me worried. Come on, let's get you home." Malcolm watched as Martin grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her to her feet. His grip seemed too tight, his movements lacking the gentleness one would expect from a worried father. The police officers seemed to notice it too, as Officer Chen stepped forward, her hand raised slightly. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone professional but firm, "we still need to take some statements for our record before you go. It might be better if we do this outside the restroom, and we also need to secure the area first." Martin's face darkened, a flash of annoyance crossing his features before he schooled them back into a mask of concern. "Please, officer," he said, his tone clipped. "This is not a crime scene. This is just a family matter." Malcolm felt a surge of anger at the man's dismissive tone. He pointed toward the sink, where the crumpled white blanket lay. "Officers, there's a blanket in the sink," and the girl looked distressed. "I believe we should at least ask the girl about the situation," he insisted, his voice steady as he emphasized the seriousness of the situation. The officer approached the sink, inspecting the blanket. He saw that there was no blood, and both the baby and the girl appeared healthy and unharmed. Martin turned to the officer, his expression softening slightly. "My daughter was just too excited about the baby and simply ran away from the hospital. When she realized she couldn't handle the baby, she hid here and cried. That's all there is to it." The officers exchanged glances. Then Officer Johnson turned to Malcolm. "Mr. Gaines, we understand you're worried," he said, his tone placating. "But we haven't found any injuries on the girl or the baby. The father is here and they're safe. Mr. Brooks, I assume your wife, the mother of the child, is terribly worried, waiting at the hospital. We'll escort you two and the baby back so you can reunite with her as soon as possible." Malcolm couldn't keep quiet any longer. The pieces weren't fitting together, and every instinct he had was screaming that something was very wrong. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice rising with frustration and concern. "I saw this girl run out of the subway alone, carrying a baby. She looked terrified. This isn't just a simple runaway." The police were taken aback, exchanging glances as they considered Malcolm's statement for a moment. Noticing their reaction, Malcolm opened his mouth to protest further, but Martin interrupted him. "Hey, who do you think you are?" Martin snarled, his face reddening. The sudden shift in his demeanor was jarring. You don't have the right to tell the police what they should or shouldn't do. Mind your position, Clerk. The tension in the room was palpable. Margaret stepped between Malcolm and Martin, trying to diffuse the situation. Malcolm, you need to calm down, she said firmly. Don't cross the line. Officer Chen explained to Malcolm that they had confirmed Lena's identity. No further investigation was actually needed at this point. They would escort the family back to ensure everything was in order. Martin, still visibly angry, turned to Malcolm. This is none of your business, he spat. That's my child. I'm the father of both the baby and the girl. Nothing is wrong here. Malcolm's mind reeled at this information. He had considered the possibility of the baby being Lena's, but now, before he could process this new development, Martin was already ushering Lena and the baby out of the restroom. Officer Johnson patted Malcolm's shoulder. Good job reaching out to us, he said. The situation is settled. You don't need to worry anymore. But as Malcolm watched Martin lead Lena away, the knot of unease in his stomach only grew tighter. Something about this situation felt deeply wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was letting Lena down by not doing more. Malcolm and Margaret followed the officers as they exited the restroom, the heavy silence lingering in the air. The man paused at the door, casting one last seething glance at Malcolm before striding toward the station's exit. In that fleeting moment, Malcolm caught the dark fury in the man's eyes and the way his lips formed silent profanities. He could make out two distinct words, each dripping with contempt. In his hyper-alert state, Malcolm noticed how the man clutched his daughter and the baby, his grip too tight, almost possessive. The man's earlier explanation that the girl was simply too excited to leave the hospital with the newborn didn't sit right with him. But as Malcolm thought about it, he felt the excuse was too weak. No child would run away from the hospital unless there was some deeper, more sinister reason behind it. Malcolm, Margaret's voice cut through his thoughts, her tone a mixture of concern and exasperation. You need to let this go. The police have handled it. We should go back. But Malcolm couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He turned to his manager, his face etched with worry. Didn't you see how he grabbed her? How she flinched when he came in? That's not normal, Margaret. Margaret sighed, running a hand through her greying hair. I know you mean well, but this isn't our business. We have a station to run, remember? There are still passengers from the concert who need assistance. Malcolm felt a surge of frustration. He knew he couldn't just walk away from his suspicions, but he also understood that for now there wasn't much he could do. He took a last glance over his shoulder and now watched as the officer led the man and his daughter out of the station, feeling more defeated than proud or relieved. As they walked back, Malcolm chose not to return to his station on the platform. Instead, he followed Margaret into the staff room and into the manager's office. The moment they stepped inside, Margaret turned to him. Take a 10-minute breather, then get back to your shift. Malcolm let out a long breath, struggling to compose himself. I'm sorry for how I acted earlier, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's understanding gaze softened her features. I understand how this situation has provoked you, especially after losing your wife and the stillborn a few years ago. Her words struck a painful chord, and Malcolm looked up, nodding as the weight of the past settled over him. As he touched his vest, trying to steady himself against the painful memory, his fingers brushed against the birth record paper tucked inside. It suddenly dawned on him that in the chaos he had forgotten to hand it over to the family or the officers. Margaret, he said, his voice steadier now, can I get the rest of the night off? It's emotionally challenging for me. I also need to return something, he said suddenly, reaching out to the birth record still tucked in his vest pocket. The girl, Lena, she left this in the sink. I should give it back. He pulled the birth record, showing it to her. Margaret frowned, shaking her head. You can't just take your shift off. There are still plenty of passengers from the concert on Platform 1 who need you. We've already wasted enough time on this. Malcolm glanced at his watch, startled to realize that 30 minutes had passed since he'd left his post at the platform. He felt a pang of guilt, and the night was slipping away. Just leave the birth record here on the table, she suggested. I'll call an officer to collect it and return it to the family after I speak with the janitor. You need to get back to work, Malcolm." Reluctantly, Malcolm set the paper down on the table. Margaret gave him a reassuring nod before exiting the office to find the janitor. Once she was gone, a wave of defiance washed over him. He retrieved the birth record, folded it carefully and tucked it back into his vest, determined to keep it safe. His heart was pounding, but he knew he couldn't let this go. Malcolm left the office and made his way back to the platform, his mind churning with possibilities. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but there was still a steady stream of passengers waiting for trains. He resumed his position behind the yellow line, going through the motions of directing passengers and ensuring safety protocols were followed, thinking for a second that the concert must have been a really big one to have so many people still out at this hour. But then, as he worked, his thoughts kept drifting to Lena's frightened face, the way she had clung to the baby as if her life depended on it. And then there was Martin Brooks, with his rough handling and quick temper. Something didn't add up. The subway speakers crackled to life, the automated voice cutting through the noise. "Attention passengers, the upcoming trains are the last trains of the night. Please ensure you board the correct train for your destination." Malcolm pushed thoughts of the girls out of his mind once more and shifted his focus to the digital display. The last train for Platform 1 was due any minute now. Across the way on Platform 2, the display showed that the final train heading back towards the hospital would arrive in about 15 minutes. As the last train for Platform 1 pulled into the station with a screech of metal on metal, Malcolm redoubled his efforts. He guided and helped passengers onto the train. As the doors closed and the train pulled away, Malcolm found himself alone on the now empty platform. He turned his attention to Platform 2, where his co-worker still stood vigilant. Malcolm raised a hand in greeting, intending to walk over and chat during this lull. But as he started to move, a familiar figure caught his eye. The homeless woman from earlier was sitting on the ground next to a vending machine. She seemed to be preparing to move, perhaps seeking a quieter spot now that the platform was emptying. Malcolm hesitated for a moment, then decided to approach her. As he drew near, the woman's posture stiffened defensively. "I ain't done nothing wrong," she slurred, alcohol still heavy on her breath. "What do you want?" Malcolm held up his hands in a placating gesture. "It's not that, don't worry," he assured her. "I actually wanted to ask about the young girl you saw in the restroom earlier." The woman grunted, eyeing him suspiciously. She seemed more sober than before, but the effects of alcohol were still evident. "What do you want to know?" she asked gruffly. Malcolm chose his words carefully. "Can you tell me what happened when you were in the restroom? What did you see?" The woman's bloodshot eyes seemed to focus slightly as she recalled the event. "I was just finished using the stall when she came in," she began. "Poor thing was covered in sweat, looked scared out of her mind. Crying too." She paused, her brow furrowing. "She took the baby's blanket off, put it on the sink, then she started begging me to help her." Malcolm listened intently, his heart aching for Lena. The woman continued, her voice lowering slightly. "I could smell the baby had peed. There was a urine stain on the girl's dress too, but I couldn't help her, didn't want to get into trouble, you know, and I was too drunk to think straight anyway." "Is there anything else you remember?" Malcolm pressed gently. The woman was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, there was something else. When I asked her why she was wearing that hospital dress, she showed me an operation mark on her stomach." Malcolm felt his heart begin to race. He remembered Martin's words, claiming the baby was his child. But if what this woman was saying was true... Malcolm felt sick as his mind conjured possible scenarios, each more horrifying than the last. The homeless woman shifted uncomfortably. "That's enough talk," she muttered. "You gonna pay me for this information or what?" Pulled from his disturbing thoughts, Malcolm reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled dollar bills. "This is all I have on me right now," he said apologetically, holding out the money. The woman stared at the bills for a moment, then snatched them from his hand without a word of thanks. She stumbled to her feet and shuffled away, leaving Malcolm alone with his troubling thoughts. The speaker system crackled to life once more, announcing the imminent arrival of the last train on Platform 2. Malcolm's head snapped up, his eyes fixed on the approaching train. In that instant, without considering the consequences, he made a decision. As the train doors slid open, Malcolm sprinted across the platform and boarded the subway car. He caught a glimpse of his co-worker's confused face, heard him calling out, but Malcolm paid no heed. His mind was consumed with one thought. He needed to make sure Lena was safe. The car was nearly empty, with only a few late-night travelers occupying the seats. As the doors closed and the train began to move, Malcolm's heart raced. He tried to justify his actions to himself. He was just returning the birth record after all. But deep down he knew the truth. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lena was in danger, and he had to do something about it. As the train gathered speed and pulled away from the station with a lurch, Malcolm's heart raced. What was he doing? He was abandoning his post, potentially risking his job. But the thought of Lena and the baby, possibly in danger, overrode all other concerns. The journey to the hospital station felt interminable. Malcolm's leg bounced nervously as he watched the dark tunnel walls flash by outside the windows. He rehearsed what he would say when he arrived at the hospital, how he would explain his presence. But deep down he knew he was acting on instinct rather than any concrete plan. Finally, the train slowed, and the automated voice announced their arrival at Crest Hill General Hospital Station. Malcolm was the first one out of the doors, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty station as he made his way to the exit. The night air was cool on his face as he emerged onto the street. The hospital loomed before him, its windows glowing softly in the darkness. Malcolm took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever he might find inside. As he approached the entrance, the automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, admitting Malcolm into the brightly lit lobby. The antiseptic smell of the hospital hit him immediately, bringing with it a flood of memories. He pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. Making his way to the information desk, Malcolm cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said to the tired-looking receptionist. "I'm looking for the maternity wing. It's about Lena Brooks and her baby sister." The receptionist eyed him suspiciously, taking in his subway uniform. "Are you family?" Malcolm hesitated for a moment before deciding on a half-truth. "I'm here to return something they left at the subway station," he said, pulling out the birth record from his vest pocket. After a moment's consideration, the receptionist gave him directions. Malcolm thanked her and set off down the corridor, his heart pounding with each step. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do or say when he found Lena and her family, but he knew he had to see for himself that they were safe. As he turned the corner into the maternity wing, Malcolm noticed a small figure sitting alone in the waiting area. It was Lena, now dressed in regular clothes instead of the hospital gown. They must have changed her because of the urine stain. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening in both recognition and surprise. Malcolm approached Lena cautiously, his heart racing. The girl's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. He crouched down to her level, careful to maintain a non-threatening distance. "Hello, Lena," he said softly. "Do you remember me from the subway station? I'm Malcolm." Lena nodded slowly, her small hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Why are you here?" she whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. Malcolm took a deep breath. "I wanted to make sure you and the baby were okay," he explained. "I was worried about you." Lena's lower lip trembled slightly. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice barely audible. "Dad will be angry." A chill ran down Malcolm's spine at her words. He glanced around the waiting area, relieved to see it was empty save for them. "Where is your dad now, Lena?" She pointed to a nearby hospital room. "In there with the doctor and Mom." Malcolm nodded, trying to keep his voice calm despite the growing knot of anxiety in his stomach. "Lena, there's something I need to ask you. It might seem a bit strange, but it's important." Lena looked up at him, her young face etched with worry. "What is it?" Malcolm took a deep breath. "In the station, a homeless woman told me. She mentioned She said you showed her an operation mark on your stomach. Is that true? Lena's eyes widened slightly and she gave a slow nod. Yes, she whispered. I had my appendix removed a few days ago. Dad said that since Mom was giving birth, it was better to have my surgery done at the same time so they wouldn't have to keep coming back to the hospital. Do you want to see the scar? It's on the side of my stomach, she added, patting the spot gently. Malcolm shook his head. No, Lena, you don't have to. I believe you. A wave of relief washed over him as the tension in his shoulders eased. At least now he knew the baby wasn't Lena's, but he still didn't have the full story. Can you tell me about the baby then, Lena? He asked gently. Is she your daughter? Lena's reaction was immediate. She shook her head vigorously, her eyes filling with tears. No, she exclaimed. She's my sister. My mom had her. Her eyes filled with tears. They were so happy when she was born, she began, her voice trembling, but then the doctor came and said there was something wrong with her. Malcolm leaned in slightly, his brow furrowed with concern. What did the doctor say was wrong? He said her heart was growing outside her body, Lena explained, her young face etched with worry beyond her years. He said she needed a big operation to fix it. Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. He had heard of this condition, ectopia cordis. It was extremely rare and often fatal. The gravity of the situation began to sink in. What happened after the doctor said this? He gently prompted. Lena's eyes darted nervously to the closed door of the hospital room before she continued. After the doctor left, I heard Dad talking. I was in the toilet, but I heard him say to Mum, he said he wanted to get rid of the baby. Her voice broke on the last word, a tear sliding down her cheek. Malcolm felt a surge of anger and disgust. What do you mean, get rid of? He asked, dreading the answer. He said he already had one daughter, and he didn't need another, especially one that would cost so much money and probably die anyway, Lena whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. Mom and Dad started arguing. Dad kept saying he wanted to get rid of the baby. I was so scared. I didn't want them to hurt my sister, so I took her and ran away. Malcolm felt his heart drop at Lena's revelation, the weight of her words crashing over him like a cold wave. He was taken aback, grappling with the chilling realization that a father could utter such heartless sentiments about his own child. Before Malcolm could reply, the door to the hospital room swung open. Martin emerged, accompanied by a woman Malcolm presumed to be Lena's mother. The baby was cradled in a car seat designed like a basket, small and delicate. Martin's eyes widened in shock and then narrowed in fury when he saw Malcolm. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snarled. "Get away from my daughter, or I'll call the police, you stalker." Malcolm stood up slowly, placing himself between Martin and Lena. "I know everything," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "And I won't let you hurt this baby. I'll be the one calling the police." Without hesitation, Malcolm hit the emergency call button on his phone and dialed 911. His voice was clear and urgent when the dispatcher answered. "This is Malcolm Gaines at Crest Hill General Hospital," he said quickly. "I need immediate assistance in the maternity wing. There's a man here who's threatening to harm a newborn baby." As Malcolm spoke to the dispatcher, providing details of their location, Martin's face twisted with fury. He roughly grabbed Lena by the arm and started to pull her away, his other hand reaching for the car seat containing the baby. "We're leaving," Martin growled, his grip on Lena visibly tightening as he tried to rush towards the maternity wing exits. Malcolm, still on the phone with the dispatcher, found himself in a moment of crisis. He couldn't physically intervene without endangering the baby or Lena, but he couldn't let them leave either. He made a split-second decision. "They're making their way to the hospital parking lot basement. Looks like it's level B1, he informed the dispatcher urgently. "I'm on their tail now." Ending the call, Malcolm hurried after Martin, Lena, and the baby. He followed them through the corridors of the hospital, down to the basement level where the parking lot was located. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously overhead, casting strange shadows as they moved. As they reached the parking lot, Lena began to struggle against her father's grip. Martin was trying to force her into the car, his movements rough and impatient. The baby in the car seat started to cry, the sound echoing eerily in the concrete structure. Malcolm realized he had to act. He couldn't wait for the police any longer. With a surge of adrenaline, he rushed forward and managed to grab the car seat out of Martin's grasp. The baby's cries grew louder, reverberating through the basement parking lot. Just then, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the air. Martin's face paled as he realized he was cornered. "Whatever," he shouted, his voice laced with venom. "Take this useless baby and the brat. I don't need either of them." Martin released Lena's arm and made a desperate dash for his car, intent on fleeing as he started his engine and drove away. But before he could get far, several police cars screeched into the parking lot, blocking his escape route. Officers poured out of the vehicles, their weapons drawn. "Exit the vehicle with your hands in the air," an officer commanded through a megaphone. After a moment of hesitation, realizing there was no escape, Martin cautiously opened the car door and stepped out, his hands raised in surrender. The officers swiftly closed in on him, pushing him to the ground and cuffing his wrists. The cool night air felt sharp against Malcolm's skin as he stood in the hospital parking lot basement, still cradling the car seat with the crying baby. The echoes of police sirens faded, replaced by the shuffling of feet and the metallic click of handcuffs as officers led Martin away. Lena clung to Malcolm's side, her small body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. An officer, his badge catching the glare of the harsh fluorescent lights, approached Malcolm and Lena with a steady, measured stride. His expression was both kind and serious as he spoke. Malcolm recognized him from earlier, Officer Johnson. "Good to see you again, Mr. Gaines," the officer said. "We need to head back to the hospital to speak with the mother," he said gently. "She's still there. Are you both okay to walk?" Malcolm nodded, adjusting his grip on the car seat. Lena's hand found his, her fingers cold and shaking slightly. With a few police officers as escorts, they made their way back through the labyrinthine corridors of the hospital. The antiseptic smell grew stronger as they approached the maternity ward, a stark reminder of the sterile environment they had fled just moments ago. They found Lena's mother waiting inside her hospital room, a nurse by her side for support. The mother's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. The soft beep of medical equipment provided a steady backdrop to the tense atmosphere. Officer Johnson cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "we need you to tell us exactly what happened here tonight." Lena's mother took a shaky breath, her hands twisting in her lap. It was Martin," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "When we found out about the baby's condition, he changed." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "He tried to get rid of the baby," she confessed, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "He said he wanted to dump her in the river. She's a girl and she has a disability. Ectopia cordis," she mentioned, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's when the baby's heart grows outside the chest cavity. She's so fragile. He said he didn't want the burden." The room fell silent save for the steady beep of the monitors. Malcolm felt a chill run down his spine at the mother's words. He glanced down at Lena, who was staring at her mother with wide, sad eyes. "We were too scared to speak out," the mother continued, her voice growing more resolute. "He threatened us, saying he'd hurt us if we told anyone. But we should have." As she provided more details, Malcolm realized they matched exactly what Lena had told him in the waiting room. He watched as Lena nodded throughout her mother's story, confirming every detail. The knot in Malcolm's stomach loosened slightly. He now knew without a doubt that the girl had not been lying. When the mother finished her account, Officer Johnson turned his attention to Lena. His voice softened as he addressed the young girl. "Lena," he said, crouching down to her level, "can you tell us how you managed to take the baby and leave the hospital without anyone noticing?" Lena's face was serious, her young features set with determination as she recounted her daring escape. "I was scared," she began, her voice small but steady. "I heard Dad talking about getting rid of my sister, and I knew I had to do something." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I overheard some nurses in the corridor talking about the end of their shift and going home. They seemed really tired. I saw that the baby room where they had taken Monica was empty, so I went in when no one was watching. Malcolm and the officers listened intently as Lena described how she had carefully wrapped the baby in a white blanket to keep her warm. "Then I took the staircase," she said. "It was dark and scary, but I kept going. Somehow it led to the back of the hospital. When I got outside, I just kept walking in the quiet night until I saw the subway station. That's when I decided to get on a train." As Lena finished her story, Malcolm and the officers exchanged glances, marveling at how this 9-year-old girl had been so brave and resourceful. One officer remarked how the blanket must have made it seem like she was just carrying linens, and how taking the staircase had helped her avoid being seen by nurses or security. "You were very brave, Lena," Officer Johnson said, genuine admiration in his voice, "and very lucky too." Malcolm couldn't help but agree. Whether it was luck, fate, or some higher power looking out for her, Lena had managed to do something extraordinary to protect her baby sister. As the night wore on, the adrenaline from the earlier chaos began to dissipate, replaced by an overwhelming sense of exhaustion that seeped into Malcolm's bones. The police officers, sensing the fatigue that hung heavy in the air, started to wind down their initial questioning. "We'll need you all to come down to the station later to give formal statements," one officer explained, his tone both gentle and firm. "But for now, you should rest, especially you, Ma'am. It's been a long night for everyone." The mention of statements stirred something in Malcolm's memory. He suddenly recalled the birth record he had tucked away in his pocket earlier that evening. He reached into his vest, his fingers brushing against the slightly crumpled paper. "I almost forgot," he said, pulling out the document with a sense of urgency. "I found this at the subway station restroom. It's the baby's birth record." He handed the paper to Lena's mother, who accepted it with trembling hands. Tears filled her eyes as she gazed at the official record of her youngest daughter's birth, a tangible reminder of the life they had fought to protect. The police officer took a moment to examine the document, nodding appreciatively at Malcolm. "Thank you, Mr. Gaines," he said warmly. "You've gone above and beyond tonight. You've saved not just a baby, but a child as well. We'll make sure to note your actions in our report." The praise washed over Malcolm, stirring a mix of discomfort and pride within him. He hadn't set out to be a hero. He had simply followed his instincts, compelled by a deep-seated sense of right and wrong. As the officers prepared to leave, one turned to Lena's mother. "We can escort you and your daughters home if you'd like," he offered kindly. "I understand you were preparing to leave the hospital earlier." Relief flooded the mother's face as she nodded. "Yes, that would be very helpful, thank you." As they began to gather their belongings, Lena approached Malcolm, her eyes wide with gratitude. Without warning, she threw her arms around him in a tight embrace. Surprised by the sudden gesture, Malcolm gently patted her back. "Thank you," Lena whispered, her voice muffled against his vest, "for believing me and helping us." Malcolm felt a lump form in his throat at her words. "You're welcome, Lena," he said softly. "You're a very brave girl. You're a real sister-keeper. Your little sister Monica is lucky to have you." Stepping back, Lena's mother approached them. Although her eyes were red from tears, they sparkled with genuine gratitude. "I can't thank you enough for what you've done," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "If there's ever anything we can do—" She trailed off, seemingly lost in thought before suddenly remembering something. "Oh, let me give you my number," she said, fumbling in her purse. "I don't have a business card with me, but—" Malcolm pulled out his phone. "I can just type it in," he offered, his fingers poised above the screen. The mother nodded gratefully and recited her number, which Malcolm entered carefully. As the family prepared to leave with their police escort, Malcolm felt a swirl of relief and sadness. He had been through so much with them in such a brief time, and now it was coming to an end. He watched them disappear down the hospital corridor, Lena turning to give him one last wave before they rounded the corner. The abrupt silence in the room was broken by the buzzing of Malcolm's phone. He looked at the screen, and his heart sank as he saw his manager, Margaret, had already left him half a dozen missed calls. With a deep breath, he answered the call. "Hello, Margaret." "Malcolm, where are you?" Margaret's voice cut through the air, sharp with annoyance. "The police called the station. They told me what happened. While I'm grateful for what you've done, you're going against protocol and abandoning your shift. Malcolm closed his eyes, the weight of the night's events pressing down on him. I'm sorry, Margaret, he replied quietly. I just couldn't abandon my instincts. If you need to fire me, I'll accept the consequences of my actions. A long pause stretched between them, as Malcolm held his breath, bracing for the worst. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her voice softer than before. For this one time, I'll let it slide, she said, but next time I won't be so lenient. You still need to continue the rest of your shift and come back to the station. No arguments. A wave of relief washed over Malcolm. Thank you, Margaret, he said sincerely. I really appreciate your understanding. As the call ended, he checked his watch. His shift was only half over. He still had hours left to work. With a weary sigh, he gathered himself and made his way out of the hospital. The cool night air brushed against his face as he stepped outside. The streets were nearly silent, save for the occasional car gliding past. The last train had already departed, and as Malcolm made his way toward the subway station for his return to Crest Hill, his mind lingered on the night's events. The night shift, he mused, was always unpredictable. Some nights were quiet and uneventful, the hours stretching endlessly in silence, with barely a train passing through, yet he still had to stand watch, ensuring no trouble lurked in the shadows. Other times, like tonight, it spiraled into a whirlwind of chaos, testing him in ways he never could have foreseen. With a sigh, he hoped the rest of his shift would pass peacefully after everything that had transpired. Yet as he approached the familiar entrance of Crest Hill subway station, he felt a renewed appreciation for his job and the unpredictable nature of life. As he descended the stairs to the platform, ready to resume his duties, a small smile tugged at his lips. Who knew what the rest of the night might hold? In the world of the night shift, anything was possible.